It's so good to be with you. My name's Pete, as Pastor Mark just said, and I always love being here. I think it's my fourth year in a row to be here for Voices, and I just love it every time for a couple reasons. Number one, I love your pastor. He is an incredible man. He's been an incredible friend to me, and my life has had a lot of different stages to it, and real early on in life, God blessed me, and as a young man, I wrote a couple books that were bestsellers, and when that happens, there's a lot of people that kind of flock to you, right? And then I went through some really tough times, and my whole life kind of just fell apart. And when that happens, people don't flock to you, people run away from you. And your pastor was someone who, while everybody else was running away, he ran too. And that says a lot about him, and he believes in what he preaches. And my life has been shaped because of that grace that he believes and he preaches. And so I will forever be indebted to him for believing in me when I could not believe in myself. Everybody needs that, right? You're going to have those seasons where you cannot even believe in yourself, and you need somebody else who can believe for you. And he did that for me. And the second reason I love coming here is just because I love this church. I love what it stands for. I love the people that are part of this place. I love that next week on AKA Man's Day, you guys are going to have mechanical bulls. Like, how cool is that? Like, I'll come for that. I don't care who's preaching. Like, that's amazing. I actually rode a real bull one time. I was in college, and I went to this like county fair in Kentucky, and that's where I was in school in the state of Kentucky, and they were doing bull riding, and I was like, that's awesome. I think I could do that. I just seen the movie 8 Seconds. Anybody see that movie? I was like, I got this, right? I'm fully inspired. And so I remember, in my defense, I didn't actually think they would let me ride a bull. Like, I thought you had to have a license or like something to do that. Apparently not. $10, and they will put a number on your chest and on your back. And I still remember to this day, they're tying me down on this bull, and I remember saying to these two guys, I was like, guys, not too tight. Like, I don't want to get hung up on this bull. And that guy looked me right in the eyes. He said, son, you're going to come right off this bull. He was right. I did. Like 0.5 seconds later, I remember I was running in mid-air, right? I ran as fast as I could. I jump over that fence. I look back, and that bull is on the other side of the arena. But I didn't care. I wanted out of there so bad. So it's going to be much safer for you guys next week. But please take lots of video, because I want to see some of you guys get tossed off that thing. That's awesome. So it's an honor to be here, and I'm really excited. My wife's with me, which is a blast. She's pregnant. We're due in July, so it could happen. It could happen in the next 31 minutes, which would be so exciting to like have a baby born here. That'd be incredible. So probably not, but it could. But I've been thinking a lot about parenting, because I'm kind of getting a second chance at this. So I have 3 boys that are older, and I've been thinking a lot about like the things that I taught them, and that's 3 boys. Now I'm having a little girl, so it's going to be very, very different for me. And I've been thinking about all the different things that like I had to teach my boys. Had to teach them a lot of things, like early on. Things like, how to be potty trained. You teach them things like how to share. Teach them things like how to throw a ball. Like all these kind of things that you teach your kids. The one thing, though, that I never had to teach my kids was how to blame, right? That came very natural, right? They knew how to blame. They knew when they had done something wrong and they had been caught or they had been called out. They knew instinctively how to point the finger at somebody else. I think I told you guys this story 4 years ago, but some of you probably weren't here, so I'll tell it again because it kind of illustrates my point. I had my middle son, at the time, I think he was 4, at the pool one day. And so we're hanging out at the pool. It's a Sunday afternoon. It's our neighborhood pool. A lot of people at that time went to the church I was pastoring in our neighborhood. So it's lots of people I know there at the pool. And I don't know, maybe there's 50 people at this pool. And I've got my son. He's just kind of learned to swim, and he's kind of doing his own deal. So I'm reading a book, right? And it was a Christian book, if that helps this illustration at all. It was a Christian book, and my son had already at least 3 times come to me and said, Dad, I have to go pee. And there's this pool house, but you have to kind of go up this hill to the pool house. It's a real pain. I'm trying to enjoy my Christian book, right? And just kind of relax a little bit on a Sunday afternoon. And about like seriously, the 4th or 5th time, he's like, Dad, I have to go pee. I'm like, hey, bud, this one time, just pee in the pool, right? And just kind of left it at that, right? So I go back to my really good Christian book. I'm sitting there reading, and like maybe 15 seconds later, I hear everybody around the pool going like, and I look up, and my son Gage is standing on the edge of the pool, trunks around his ankles, peeing into the pool. And so I throw down my really good Christian book and I run over there. And by the time I get kind of next to him, right, and he looks embarrassed, like obviously, like he realized by the reaction of everybody around the pool, this was not the right thing to do, right? And so it's dead quiet around this pool. Everybody's just staring at him, at me. How am I going to react to this? There's like one little kid left in the pool who's trying to get out as fast as he can, right? And I just kind of leaned down next to him. I'm like, hey, bud, you can't do that. And dead silent, right, around the pool. He looks right at me, and he just points his finger at me. He says, Dad, you told me to pee in the pool. Technically, son, that is true. I did say that, but like that's not exactly what I meant. And so from a very early age, we all learned this, right? When we were caught, when we were embarrassed, when we were in the wrong, we learn to blame. And so what happens kind of throughout our life, and this happens a lot inside of the church because we put ourselves in these environments where the Holy Spirit does this work, and he points out certain hurts, he points out sin, he points out patterns, and in those moments, right, we have a choice. And we can stand in that moment when a truth has been reflected to us, right? And in that moment, it can be a true moment of transformation where your life will never be the same again. Or it can be a moment where instead you choose to blame and you choose to ignore and you choose to pretend and you choose to point a finger. So you either own it, right, and take personal responsibility, or you, again, ignore, pretend, and blame. And so I want to talk a little bit today about what personal responsibility looks like for each one of us. And again, the reality is it's our human nature. We love to judge. We love to point the finger. Have you ever noticed, like, when you're kind of just driving along, going down the interstate, everyone that drives slower than you is an idiot, and everyone who drives faster than you is a maniac? But the constant is what? Your speed is just right, right? That's the kind of the way that we all view life. And ever since Adam and Eve, this has been a problem. So, simple message today. I just have 2 points. I want to talk about what does it look like to take ownership, all right? And the first thing is this. You have to stop blaming God and other people for your circumstances. Stop blaming God and other people for your circumstances. Now, let me tell you why we do this. Why we all do this. And it's just a quick history lesson. This is Genesis chapter 3, right? I'll start in verse 8. The story will be very familiar to you, okay? It says, as the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God who was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, where are you? Where are you? He answered, I heard you in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. And he said, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? Right? So here's the moment, right? This is the moment of clarity. This is the moment when we feel conviction, right? This is the moment when you feel the Spirit of God working in your life. It's the moment where maybe somebody else, God has used somebody else, maybe use Pastor Mark, maybe use somebody to kind of point out something in your life that you knew in an instant, wow, this is something that needs to be transformed. This is something that needs to be healed. Verse 12, though, the man said, the woman that you put here with me, That woman, the naked one over there, that one, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it. And then the Lord God said to the woman, what is this that you have done? And the woman said, the serpent, right? The serpent deceived me, and I ate it. And from that moment forward, listen, if you ever want to know why we all play the blame game, that's it right there. It's a part of your spiritual bloodstream, right? This is your family tree, right? This is where all of this came from. Adam blames Eve. Eve blames the serpent. And so therefore, we all love to minimize our guilt by making somebody else look bad. Now, here's what's so tricky. What's so tricky about that whole dynamic, and even what happened with Adam and Eve, is technically speaking, they both told the truth, didn't they? When Adam says, this woman that you gave to me, and notice for Adam, what's he doing? He's not just blaming Eve, he's also blaming God. This woman that you gave to me, right? In other words, this is your fault and it's her fault. It's both of y'all's fault. I had nothing to do with this. You two made this whole, right? When he says, she gave me the fruit, he's telling the truth. She did. When Eve says, the serpent deceived me. When she points the finger at the serpent and says, no, the serpent deceived me. She's telling the truth. They're both telling the truth, but in telling the truth, there's a lot more going on there. They're actually using the truth, right? They're telling the truth, but they're using the truth in order to deflect any kind of personal responsibility from the situation. This is exactly why some of you are so stuck right now in life. You're like, I'm just telling the truth. I'm just telling the truth. That's what happened in our divorce. Just telling the truth. That's what happened. Right? I'm just telling the truth. This is why I have an addiction to this. Like when I was a kid, this happened or that. I'm just telling the truth. Right? You're telling the truth, but there's a lot more going on in there. You're using the truth. You're not just telling the truth. You're using the truth in order to deflect any kind of personal responsibility from the situation. And whenever you use the truth, you're going to make yourself stuck. You're never going to see the growth. You're never going to see the transformation that you so desire in your life, right? So when you use the truth, again, you're using it to avoid personal responsibility. Here's 4 things, just real quick, I'll rapid fire this to you, that this whole scenario with Adam and Eve tells me. The first thing is this. It tells me that the tendency to blame others is deeply ingrained in human nature. You know how I know this? Isn't it true? You don't have to raise your hand on this one. But isn't it true that some of you right now are thinking to yourself, man, I wish so-and-so could really hear this sermon. Like this would be it, John. I'm sending him the link to this one because he needs it. Right now you're thinking about somebody else that you think needs to hear this. But trust me, it's for you. It's for you. This is for you. This is for me. We all do this. Number 2, it tells us that left to ourselves, most of the time we will do anything to avoid taking personal responsibility. Number 3, it tells us that blaming others is often nothing more than a very subtle twisting of the truth. And the 4th thing that it tells me is that without a deep work of the grace of God within us, we will all do exactly what Adam and Eve did in this moment. There's a word in our culture today for what Adam and Eve did in that moment, and it's called victimism. That's the word in our culture today. And for those of you who easily slip into that role, you have painted this picture that all of life for you is you've been treated unfairly. You ended up with the short end of the stick. You were dealt a lousy hand of cards. And so we all start blaming, right? So you'll blame your family. It's your parents' fault, right? It's your parents' fault for the way that they parented you. That's why you do what you do. It's your parents' fault. They didn't stick together, so you didn't have a good example. So that's why you're having the relational troubles that you are, right? We blame in our family. It's my husband's fault. He doesn't know how to communicate. It's my wife's fault. She just blows everything out of proportion. We blame in the church, right? We do this all the time. Whose fault is it that you're not growing spiritually? Oh, that's easy. It's Pastor Mark's fault. Like, it's not my fault. It has nothing to do with the fact that I have no spiritual disciplines whatsoever, right? If Pastor Mark taught this way, or if he taught this, then, right? And here's how I know that the lack of spiritual growth that you may be experiencing right now has nothing to do with that sermon. I would say 99% of Christians in America are educated far beyond their obedience. Not that you need to hear something new, you just need to already practice what you know. And then you'll see the fruit, right? We blame. I'll never forget, I was leading a church in Nashville, and I remember getting cornered in the lobby by this guy. It was a single guy. He was just furious with me because he didn't think we had a great singles ministry. And he was convinced that the reason he was still single was because we didn't have a dynamic singles ministry. And I'm like, if you got time, brother, I can sit down with you and give you 10 better reasons that you're single right now that have nothing to do with the fact that we don't have enough people in our singles ministry right now, right? We could blow this single ministry up and you'll still be as single as can be. Trust me. Right? We love to blame, right? We blame in schools. It's the teacher's fault that my kids having trouble. We blame in politics. It's the greedy Republicans. No, it's the liberal Democrats. If you lose your job, it's your boss's fault, right? He had it out for you. From the beginning, you never had a chance, right? You didn't keep a promise. That's not your fault, right? You were busy doing other things. If you lose your temper, not your fault. They provoked you. Right? It's their fault, right? You didn't want to do that. If a relationship ends, not your fault, right? It's the other person. You were perfectly normal, right? It's the other person, right? That they were the ones that kind of like blew everything up, right? You see what I'm saying? We just do this day in and day out. By nature, we will do anything and we will say anything to avoid any kind of personal responsibility in our life. So if you want to take ownership in your life, you have to get to that place of saying, I'm not going to blame God, and I'm not going to blame other people for my circumstances. And then number 2, and this is equally as important, you have to courageously decide that it may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. So, I think in the vast majority of situations in our life, every one of us can look internally and say, you know what, I need to own something in that situation. However, there are situations and circumstances in life where you actually were completely a victim. More than likely, it's something that sadly happened to you when you were a child. And so, first of all, I want to say to you, I'm extremely sorry that what happened to you happened to you. More than likely, somebody that you should have been able to trust took advantage of you. And there's some pain and some hurt there, right? You're truly a victim. But I also want to say to you, and I think this is important, and I say this in a very kind way, but I want to say it in a truthful way, that some people want to be right, they want to be justified, they want to assign blame more than they want to be healed. When I was in college, I saw this terrible accident. I'm sitting there, I think it was my junior year of college. It was kind of early in the evening, but it was dark, and I'm sitting at this red light. It's a kind of a 3-way red light like this, and then on the other side of the intersection, I'm looking straight across, is a train track. And I kind of sitting there at the red light, and I kind of look up, I'm like, what is that noise? And there's a car sitting on the train track who had gotten its wheels stuck. And that car, the noise I heard was the guy revving the engine. He's like, woo, and he's just spinning. And as soon as I understand like what's going on, I look up and I hear that train whistle. And it's like just so loud, right? And I mean, 3 seconds later, boom, just right into the side of that car. And I see that car just go up in the air and it's just doing somersaults, right? And I'll never forget the sound of that train, those brakes just screeching after that moment, and that train's trying to come to a stop. I don't remember how long it took the train to stop, but it felt like an eternity. By that point, I had run across the intersection, and as soon as that train stopped, there were like 3 of us who jumped over that train to get to the other side to see what in the world had happened, obviously fearing the worst. The guy ended up, the best thing could have happened to him. He actually got ejected out the back window of that car, landed a long way from that car, and actually survived that accident, but he was messed up. But I remember when we're running towards that car, I heard somebody yell, "Call the police." And then somebody else yelled, "No, call an ambulance." And I didn't think about it in that moment. It was like the next day I was thinking about everything that had happened. And I was like, call the police, call an ambulance. And I'm like, that was a really interesting dynamic that happened there when you kind of analyzed it. Because, like, I've been in 2 or 3 accidents in my whole life. And all of those accidents are what I would call police calling accidents. You know, you call the police when you need to assign blame, right? When we need to figure out who's at fault here, like, is it this guy behind me because he was looking at his cell phone, not paying attention, and he kind of bumped into me? Like, nobody's hurt. We just need to call the police because we got to assign some blame. We got to figure out who's at fault. We're both kind of pointing fingers here. You call an ambulance when somebody's hurt. When somebody's hurt, when somebody's bleeding, when life's at risk here, right? Who cares who's at fault? In that moment, does anybody care? Like this guy, right? He's ejected out the back window. Was it the train's fault? Was it an engineer's fault? Was something faulty about the tracks he was driving over? Was it his fault because he was drunk? By the way, yes, it was his fault because he was drunk. But in that moment, nobody cared who was at fault. Just call an ambulance because this guy looks like he's probably dying if he doesn't get help right away. Now, here's what's happening in some of your lives. You keep calling the police to point fingers and blame, but what you really need is an ambulance, right? What you really need is a healing that only God himself can bring to you and in your life. But you keep calling the police. You're more interested in assigning the blame. So the question really becomes, do you want to be healed? And that's a fair question. Let me show you this passage. This is John chapter 5. It's a very interesting story. You've probably heard this story before, but there's something I want to point out to you that I think is real key. John 5, verse 1. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there, who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" It's an interesting question. We just read that the guy has been an invalid for 38 years, and Jesus asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." And at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat, and he walked. Now, I want to go back to the question. Do you want to get well? Because that's a really important question. And at first glance, if you're just kind of reading through the story, you're like, does he want to get, Jesus, of course he wants to get well. Of course this man wants to get well. 38 years he's been sitting on this mat. Of course he wants to get well. But what Jesus is doing is Jesus is probing, and he's probing at the level of the will. And what Jesus is really getting to is this. What Jesus knows about this man, for 38 years, he has not been able to walk. For 38 years, his entire living has been made by being a beggar, which means what has happened is that his identity, right, and he's not to blame for this. This is just what happened in his life. His identity became that of a beggar. That's what he did. That's how he functioned. That's how he related to everybody around him. Everybody around him was somebody that needed to do something for him. And so what Jesus is saying is, I can heal you, but before I heal you, what I need to know before I release my power in your life is, do you really want to get well? What Jesus is probing at is that there's a cost that comes along with this healing. And the cost is from this moment forward, he's saying, hey, dude, from this moment forward, you need to know, if I make you well, you can't be a beggar anymore. You have to understand, you can't be a victim anymore. If I'm going to heal you, things are going to change. People are no longer going to look at you and just feel sorry for you. They're not. right? Your identity is going to change, and I know your identity is wrapped right now around being a beggar, and everything's going to change. So before I release my power in your life, I need to know, do you want to get well? And if the answer is yes, miracles can happen in your life. So I think this is a fair question right now. Do you want to get well? Do you want to heal from that painful divorce? Do you really want that? Do you want to heal from the angst of that relationship that's just not right? Do you want to heal the pattern of sin or the pattern of addictions that you have in your life? Do you really want that? Because what you have to understand before that healing happens, you're going to have to give up some things. You're going to have to give up being an injustice collector, because that's what you've been doing most of your life, right? Just collecting all the injustices of everything that happens to you. You have to give up looking at this world as if it's hostile and unfair towards you. You have to give up endlessly repeating how everyone has hurt you. You have to give up that grudge. That grudge that you've been nursing for so long, it's become a part of you. And let's be honest, to give up that grudge, to give up that resentment, to give up that bitterness, if you did that, you wouldn't even know who you are. It's become a part of you. So it's going to take a lot to give that up. Listen, if you really want to get well, you know what this means? You may actually have to start forming some real relationships around you. Stop holding everybody at arm's distance because you don't trust. Right? If you want to get well, there's a cost. You have to give up just always receiving sympathy from everybody who looks at you and just says, I don't know how you do it. You have to give up creating this identity around being a victim. And I know you think you want healing, but I think this might be harder than some of you imagine, because you have to give up some things. And let me tell you, I know how this goes. It takes a lot of courage, right? So when that moment happens for you, when all of a sudden the Holy Spirit kind of opens your eyes and you see some things about your life, you see that grudge that you need to let go of, when you see that pattern of sin that all of a sudden you need healing from, like when God opens your eyes and you see that thing inside of you that you know you need some healing from. Listen, that moment is a key moment. And I've been there before, and I know what you know, like if you ever get up in the middle of the night, this happens to me the older I get, you get up in the middle of the night, you got to go pee, and you walk into the bathroom and you flip that light on, and you're like, oh my gosh, like it's so bright, right? That's what it feels when God shines that light into the dark places of your life. You're like, I don't want to see that. This is uncomfortable, right? It takes a tremendous amount of courage in that moment to not point a finger and run and hide. To do exactly what Adam and Eve did is what feels natural to us. When you feel that conviction, when God shines that light into your life, the natural response is to want to run and hide. You see that you're naked all of a sudden, right? Your natural response is to say, oh yeah, that's true, but it's their fault. Not my fault, right? That's a natural response. So it takes a tremendous amount of courage to stay there in that moment, in the light, and say, yeah, that's me. And I don't need to call the police. I need an ambulance. I need God's help. I need his healing. It takes a tremendous amount of courage. In fact, the only thing that I think that will give you the power in that moment to stay right there and be in the light, just one thing. One thing. It's the knowledge that you are loved by God, absolutely, unconditionally, and forever. That is the only thing that will give you the power to stay in that moment. And if you don't keep that front and center, that you have this God of the universe, right, who loves you unconditionally no matter what, if you don't see that, if you don't embrace that, everything inside of you is going to want to blame. It's going to make you want to run away. That's what will happen. But if you stay in that moment and you focus on that love, see, here's the beautiful thing about the way every one of us is wired. What you crave in your heart is to be fully known and fully loved. That's the cry of the human heart. I want to be fully known and fully loved. The problem for most of us is that we're not fully known by the people around us. This creates an interesting dynamic because what happens when you're not fully known is that you can't be fully loved. You can only be loved to the extent that you are known. That's why for some of you, there are people in your life who will say things like, I love you. And they'll look you right in the eyes and they'll say, I love you. You can't receive all that love. Because when you look back at them, what you're thinking in your head is, yeah, but if you knew the truth about me, if you knew about some of those dark things, you wouldn't be saying that. So you can't even receive the love that people are trying to give you. The cry of your heart is to be fully known and fully loved. This is the beauty of the love of God, and that's why it's set apart and so different. It's why we gather and we worship and we sing about that kind of love, because that is what we're drawn to. We have this God where you have to understand this. You are fully known. And so you may pray, God, search me and know me, but he's already searched you and he's already known you, right? He knows you're fully known. And at the same time, you are also fully loved. And if you can stand in that moment when that light shines into your life and you can receive that, it changes everything. Because then and only then do you begin to receive that healing. And I'm telling you, I've been there before. I know what it feels like, and oh my gosh, it's so scary to feel like you're exposed in front of God and in front of everybody. But there's a tremendous amount of freedom. Tremendous amount of freedom that comes when you have the courage to stay in that moment and know that you are fully known and you are fully loved by the God of this universe. And so do you want to be healed? Will you stop calling the police when what you really need is an ambulance? Did they hurt you? Yeah, they did. Did they do you wrong? Probably. But stop pointing the finger. Stop calling the police when what you need is an ambulance. And I don't know what it is today that God might be convicting you of, what work. Maybe he's been doing this work in your life for weeks and months. And you've been kind of messing around with it, but you've also still been pointing fingers. I don't know what that is today, but I'm just wondering, would you just fully surrender to him once and for all? To give up the blame game. Give up pointing fingers at all these people. And just stand in that moment, receive his truth, and receive his grace into your life.